The sun has left and forgotten me. It's dark, I cannot
Your stories
see.
don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm your host, Sarah Elkins, and I call myself the Chief Story Maker at Elkins Consulting because I love to make stories to be able to share them. Just a quick reminder for our listeners who are interviewing for jobs. Our new course, Get Hired Job Interview Storytelling, is available for $199, and that includes a group storytelling practice session. So visit elkinsconsulting.com for more information. You've probably been listening to a few of the episodes over the past few months, and you know that on this podcast, I focus deeply on authenticity, identity, and how we find relevance, and all through the stories that people share with me. I met today's guest, Hauson at the Servant Leadership Conference in Fort Worth in Texas in January. And I had the opportunity to hear him speak earlier in the day prior to my keynote session that afternoon. His presentation was about the future of our US and global communities in the context of the polarization we're experiencing now. I anticipated feeling angry, sad, frustrated, all of those things because of the topic, but I actually left the session feeling hopeful. And that means a lot to me. And that's why I absolutely had to invite him to be on the show. So Hauson, thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation with me on this podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sarah. You melted my heart already. Just hearing that in the impact of my presentation. So yeah, I'm super happy to talk to you again.
Well, I still think a lot about some of what you said in terms of how to have the conversations that we need to have in order to address the polarization and some of the ideas that you had. And that's first things first. I want to make sure I ask you the question that I love to ask my podcast guests. I'd love for you to share something about yourself that other people might not know about you, our listeners. And it's something that wouldn't be on your LinkedIn profile or on your bio or resume. Do you have something you can share with us?
Yeah, I think one of the things that creates the most joy for me are Oreos. I think I might have brought it up earlier, but yeah, like I love using Oreos as almost a boundary for creative cooking. And so it's evolved from rice to Spam and Oreo musubis to fusing Spam and Oreos into Taiwanese desserts with sticky rice. So I really use that as a way to kind of like invite people into uncertainty when they try my food. And it creates a really strong bond, I've noticed, because they're willing to try that with me and they trust me to go on that journey. So yeah.
That is so cool. I love that. And that is something I know about you, but our listeners will be surprised to hear it. Oreo cookies. You actually had that conversation with me in Fort Worth about your Oreo and Spam. And we were talking about making it like having an orange sauce on it or something like that. Oreo and duck with sauce.
Yes.
With orange sauce. Yes, I remember that conversation. I have to ask, what gave you that idea? What was it? And what was the first time you did it and why?
The first time I did it, I saw a post on an Instagram account dedicated to creating like really disgusting food combinations. It'll be like beans, not beans, and it's all edible. So it'd be tough to think of anything. Maybe like a lot of food, maybe like escargot and jam or something like that. And then it'll have that in their posts. And one day I came across Oreos and rice. And I was just shook because I thought that would actually be delicious. And so when it came time for a gathering to bring something to eat, I thought it was the perfect opportunity. I think the gathering was dedicated to like interesting food combinations. And so I brought that and no one liked it. And that just brought me a lot of joy to keep on going. I was like, okay, well, maybe I will find something that the people do like. So yeah.
and have you?
Yeah. I think with the third or fourth iteration of the Spam Musubi, people like started finishing it and they started asking for more. And then the dessert, I've fed people who are very candid and some would say fickle. And they actually said it wasn't bad. They were like, I thought I was going to spit this out. So yeah, I call that a win. I call it a win.
So what was the best bad response to it?
It was my family members that just really love me. And they were like, interesting. Like they just like, it just like they had to say with their teeth gritted, and they were in the room full of the family, like, yeah. Oh, and then they're like, oh, Jesus. I think they literally said, oh, Jesus, like out of shock when they tried it. Yeah. So
that's awesome. And nobody liked it, and you did it anyway. That to me just speaks volumes about who you are, because I can't imagine making something and having people go, oh my gosh, that is disgusting, and wanting to keep trying. Like I'd scrap it and do something completely different. So I love that you were so persistent in finding some way to make this work. And that persistence is what shows up in everything you do that I know about you now. And that's really cool. So you went into school. Did you intend to have the degree that you ended up with?
For my undergrad, not so much. I was really like, I think I didn't even really know what college was. Like when I was applying for colleges, I just looked up college, business college. I knew my mom wanted me to be a nurse practitioner. And then I said, no, I'll do accounting because that was a stable, safe job. And then I realized after my first accounting class, I was like, nope, this is not for me. Because it was tough at Cal State Fullerton where I went. There was like a 40% pass rate. It was meant to filter out all of the students. And yeah, it just wasn't interesting to me. So yeah, then I went into, I found leadership development as an extracurricular activity, and it became kind of my goal to create a positive impact on as many people as possible with my career. And still within the bounds of business, I landed on data analytics in order to kind of create the insights for companies that do want to serve and create a better world for everyone. And yeah, so that's how I landed on that.
So that was your degree, was business, but business analytics was your focal point?
Yes.
Okay. And then you went on for a master's. Tell me what drove you to go to that point, to take that next step? I
had learned about, so my master's is at the University of Houston in Foresight, and I learned about it in my third year of college through a training with a guy named Richard Ramsey, who was the head of HR at the Walt Disney Company. And he had trained over 600 futurists globally on how to, like, he started the whole program because Netflix had taken his boss by a storm, and they wanted to prevent that from ever happening again. So they found strategic foresight. And through a series of one-on-one trainings, I knew I had found it felt like my calling, at least for another 10, 15 years. But yeah, I cried because I just hadn't thought, I thought, what are the chances of finding something like this at this point in my life when I had no idea what I wanted to do, to have such a perfect fit. And especially because when I was talking with this guy, Richard Ramsey, he was like, oh, you could go into data analytics. You could go that path and I can introduce you to people at Disney, or you can try this future thing and see what happens there. And so it was really like crossroads in my life where I just decided I could get into data analytics anywhere. So why not see what this future thing is about? And I've never been so grateful. I think when we ended our training together, he said, I'm finding out about this when I'm 63. You're not even 20 yet. So imagine what you could do with this information. And so ever since then, I had tried my best to become a futurist full time. And I had everything I'd done in my career from that point until now has been in service of that. And I think what I went through like a training with a bunch of global leaders. There was like people planning the future of Korea. There's head of strategy at like EY and stuff there. And for me, it said students, Cal State University Fullerton. So the fit wasn't, it was like, what am I doing here? And, but the question I had walked away with that training with was, how do I actually implement this stuff? I understand that foresight is important. I understand the impact it can have on our entire world, but how do I actually do it? And I thought about training. I thought about learning. There's a lot of free resources, but it just seemed like it was an ocean of information. And how do I make sense of all that? So I thought that a master's program made the most sense, because I'm learning from world-class futurists who then organize all the information, at least what they think is best practices and in what order I should learn that in. And as well as like the people that I meet along the way would make that journey a lot more colorful. So yeah, I was like, you know what? I'm laid off from my job. I have no money, but I'm going to do this and see what happens. So.
And you moved to Texas?
I still haven't. I really should. I am completely online my whole life. I work in Texas. I started school in Texas, and I live in California. So I'm practicing to be a digital nomad.
Wow. I didn't even realize that. I guess I knew that at some point when we were talking back in January, but I had forgotten that your whole life is remote right now. Wow, that's so cool. There's so many questions running through my head right now as you were telling the story of finding this niche. The first thing that popped into my head, because I'm just finding my niche in my 50s. Like it was my late 40s when I started really doing what I'm doing now and finding it so rewarding and finding something that I feel like I'm really good at in a distinctive way. And I couldn't give somebody your age or younger guidance in terms of finding that earlier, but you could, because you did. So was it going to college for a 4-year degree? Was it being open to, was it the way you were raised, being open to finding something like this? What do you think you could tell people that are younger, like in their late teens, 20s, maybe even 30s, that might help them, I don't know, point themselves in the right direction?
I think a few things that come to mind that I couldn't be where I'm at today without. I think the first thing that comes to mind is my upbringing. So my mom raised me always saying, just focus on being happy. It's not about the money, just be happy. And that's all I want for you. I'm proud of you if you're happy. And, you can get into a bunch of psychology stuff on that, but I just focus on fulfillment. So that was the first thing I did. Is for me, a career is all about fulfillment. And how do I be fulfillment throughout this journey and work in a place that doesn't suck up my soul or it keeps me alive and enjoying the journey. So yeah, just know what's important to you. I guess that was the first thing. And I think from there, it was really fulfillment for me comes from service. And so like, what's the best way to help others rather than thinking about like what my needs are and kind of using my needs as a bridge between like, how do I help others? What do I need to do that? Right. And I think that gets around a lot of kind of like thoughts that people have around, I want to do this job, but does it pay well enough? And I never really, I think most of my friends that come to me we talk about that issue. I always say, they're like, the average, there's one of my friends wants to be a journalist. And he's like, the average salary is like $60K a year. I need more money than that. So I'm going to be a sportscaster. And I was like, I think you're a really great journalist though. You're like one of the super smart, like you could do whatever you want. Do you really think you're the average? Like if the average journalist makes $60K, do you think you're average? No, dude, you're at least like top 10, top 5% in the world. So, like I would operate with the assumption that you're going to be that. And so that's kind of how I think about that's how I remove my salary as a barrier to where I want to go.
That makes so much sense. You did say at the beginning that you thought about going into accounting because it was a solid career choice. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you had that aha moment having had that upbringing, that wasn't all there was to it, that you had to choose something not based on this seems like a good career choice.
Yeah, 100%. It was, and it really it didn't click until I found Foresight. Like even data analytics, I was like, oh, I could do this, but technical coding stuff doesn't really align with what makes me feel alive. And so I was just really overjoyed to find something that accomplishes something similar with like helping people make better decisions or different decisions, but doing that through story and qualitative data. So yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. So we met when you were giving that presentation at the Servant Leadership Conference for Strategic Government Resources, SGR. And I met Ron Hollyfield, oh gosh, in 2018, I think. And we've been friends and connected since then. And when he invited me to come speak for that event, I just jumped at the chance because I wanted to meet him face to face after 5 years of knowing him. And your presentation was about the future of our community, our global community, from the perspective of where we are now in terms of being so polarized and the impact of that on our small communities, local governments, and our agencies. And what struck me was that it's at that small community level that we actually have potential to change things, to improve things. We can't start at the high level national, much less global politics. So when you started putting together that presentation, what was going through your head, and what was your goal for the audience to observe and absorb through your presentation?
Love that question. Yeah, it was really, I think this was kind of the second presentation we had done on polarization and how it can affect our community in America. And the first one that we did at the end of it, we did a word cloud. And the word cloud, it was, how do you feel after this presentation? And I didn't see a single positive word. It was anxiety, hopeless, worried, afraid, in danger.
Oh.
And and I think a big part of that was because the presentation was focused on like the facts and information. And I think one of the quotes, a giant bug landed on me. And one of the quotes that...
for our listeners, Hauson is actually sitting outside of a coffee shop right now because his bandwidth was too bad at his apartment. So for our listeners, when you hear a little noise and a big bug landing on his leg, that's why. All right, keep going.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we like, the reason why I'm so attracted to Foresight and what I want people to like walk away with when they go through a Foresight presentation is the idea of agency and having expanded choice. And you need creativity to have that. So like one of the quotes that I found recently was like, despair is like a sign, despair is a failure of the imagination. And I have really, that resonated with me when I created this presentation, because we need to be able to imagine alternative outcomes and futures that can happen even when everything looks dark, even when everything looks bleak. And so it's really finding this balance of communicating the facts of what's happening with polarization and what like the drivers, like the technological drivers have changed, the demographic drivers have changed, but still creating pathways towards hope and towards action that change the way that the audience thinks about and relates to the world. So that was really like what I hoped for. And that's what was kind of the guiding principle behind that presentation.
That each of us has agency in making that change. Yeah, I keep coming back to the story that was told the next day at the conference by the he was a school principal, is that right? And she is his wife, and they were in a small community, and something happened, and I can't remember exactly what the drama was, but it was awful. And there was a group of students outside of their home protesting, and she didn't know what to do. I think she worked for a church or something, or she was a pastor, and she didn't know what to do because she was recovering from a surgery. So she was in her bathrobe, and the police showed up and they came into her house so that they could, care for the people that were inside the house while they were trying to manage the protesting without cutting anything off, but still managing it so that it didn't get worse. And her biggest comment was, I'm sure they have a reason for protesting. And I'm not sure that, she said, if I had it in my head at that moment, if I could have had clarity in my head, because it was this magical hour at dusk when all the mosquitoes come out in that area, she said, if I had had my wits together, I would have gone out there with a basket full of bug spray. I would have brought out bottles of water for them, even though they're protesting at my home, because I know there's something valid about what they're protesting, even if they're in the wrong place, even if they're protesting against a wrong person, their protests are valid. And to me, that's one person sharing that vulnerability of agency, right? If I had had the clarity of mind, if I was dressed and wasn't recovering from surgery. So that's what your session brought to me. And I can't even imagine hearing those words coming out after one of my sessions, after your first session of hopeless, despair, powerless, helpless, like, holy shit, to have that be the result of your presentation has to have been heartbreaking. So when you saw that, what was your first reaction? And then how did you get your head wrapped around changing it for the next presentation? And just so our listeners understand, you are using both words, futurist and foresight, interchangeably. Is that correct?
Yes. So a foresight is a discipline. It's an interdisciplinary field. And then some practitioners within this field call themselves futurists.
Okay, great. Thank you for that distinction and clarification.
Yeah. So can you remind me the question again?
How were you affected? I know because I know you. Even a short period of time, I know that sensitivity, the empathetic and sensitive turn that you have, that's who you are. So I can kind of tell, I can imagine how that affected you, but I'd like to hear it in your words. How did it affect you to see those words? And what was the next thing you did to specifically address that in the next time you gave the presentation?
Yeah, it really felt, I felt a sense of responsibility for having them feel that way. It definitely, like, this is, I think with foresight, foresight without hope really just adds stress and it adds anxiety, because you're expanding what people knew was possible with things that are happening today. And if you only just add the threats and the things that could go horribly wrong in their life, then you're actively making their life worse. And there's still nothing they can do about it. And then that's really not in the spirit of what, like, the goal is, at least for foresight, for me, in my definition. And so, yeah, just a huge sense of responsibility and a commitment, like almost like I made a commitment that, okay, we need to do this again and we need to change it. And so when it came to the Servant Leadership Conference, I had choices on what the topic was going to be. And I decided polarization was the time, because servant leaders, and especially in a time nowadays, like of now, where we are the most polarized than we've ever been, it's crucial that people hear and feel hope in situations where they're faced with, oftentimes it feels hopeless. It does feel hopeless. It's super valid to feel that. And so the hope was that by using foresight to create hope, that they can start thinking about other aspects of the future within their entire lives. Like, oh, if I can use the future foresight to think about the future of polarization, I can do it with my personal life, and I can do it with any other setting. So, so the action was really a commitment to doing it again, and a commitment to emphasizing hope.
I love that. And what I understood from your presentation was that here are the predictions if everything remains the same. If we all remain on the same path, here are the predictions, and they are dire. They are. And then the next part was, here are some of the small actions that we can each take so that we change what the future is going to look like. Those predictions were based on us not doing anything about it. And now we have these people, a few hundred, there were 300 or 400 people in the audience, plus however many were live streaming the whole event. And if even 10% of the people in that room choose to own that agency and change just within their communities, within their micro communities within the community. So that's their family, that's the people they work with. It's telling the stories of the people they work with in positive ways so that they feel better and they bring that back home to their families and their micro communities. That's what I got out of it.
That's awesome. That makes me really happy to hear, and why I love being with SGR so much is because I think my personal focus is really around community leaders, because of the number, like the lives that they can touch, and whether that be the family, whether that be their coworkers, whether that be the community that they serve. I think that's really like the group that I feel fulfilled with serving and making an impact on. So I appreciate that your feedback on that.
So you finished the second one. If we had done a word cloud, it would have been very different that time. I'm sure of it. You would still have some of the sad, the hopeless, the fear, anxiety. I also think that you would have hope or hopeful as part of that word cloud this time. You would see a smattering of words that were positive because there were people in the room that really wanted to see that positive side to it. They were eager for it. They were hungry for it. What was your indication that it went differently afterwards, since you didn't do the word cloud? At least I don't remember seeing the word cloud at the end.
I think so. Two things was like verbal, which is always tough because people just want to give a positive impression, and so verbally, I think I heard a lot more positive feedback. Maybe it's because I was the one who was giving this presentation and it was someone else giving the presentation the first time around, but a lot of positive feedback. But the second more like concrete written feedback was around the people's relationship with AI and technology. I think there was a lot of fear and misunderstanding around AI and technology. For example, we mentioned the use of generative AI and deep fakes, and how, yes, they can, and how it's dual use, right? So yes, we can use it. It's like, oh, we can't tell what's real now. Like we won't be able to tell the difference, but we can also use that to educate and empower the community and create and like change constraints in ways that we can actually provide a counteracting force for that, if not a transformative one. And that was a very common theme in over like half of the feedback that we received through the forum, was people are now more open to technology and AI and how they want to use it. So I think that was one of the, like, it was very action oriented, right? That inherently in that feedback, like, oh, now I see this differently, and that can spill over into their choices on how they spend their time or invest their resources.
Exactly. And for our listeners, the Servant Leadership Conference in Fort Worth, Texas, hosted by SGR, Strategic Government Resources. I'm going to slow that down again. It was the Servant Leadership Conference in Fort Worth, Texas in late January 2023, hosted by Strategic Government Resources. And most of what this organization does is leadership development and recruitment within local government agencies. So that is the city of Dallas, the city of Fort Worth, all the way to the little tiny cities of Tyler, Texas. And outside of Texas, I met people from Ohio and Indiana and California. And these are the people that are working in your local government agencies. That means they're public works directors, they are water treatment plant operators, they are streets division and streets maintenance division people, and the HR offices within the cities and counties of these states. And these are the people that are providing direct services to our communities. And I think it's really important for our listeners to understand that distinction between your local government, the county government, which is usually outside of the city government, and then you have the state government and federal government. And when you antagonize your local government, you're antagonizing your neighbors. When you are finding fault with everything they do, you're finding fault with your neighbors. And these are people generally, in my experience with lots of local government that I have worked in over the years, is that these are the people that care very deeply about your community. Like, for instance, the snowplow drivers. They aren't intentionally leaving a berm next to your car. They're trying to get around your car without slipping and hitting it with their plow. And they're out there at 3 or 4 in the morning trying to clear the road so you can get your kids to school. And these are the people that are getting hammered with hostility online and even in person at public meetings. And there's just this lack of transparency that city governments need to improve. That's all there is to it. As long as we're not talking to people from the city side to the community and sharing what we know, being transparent, this is going to continue, as residents just don't know unless we tell them. So that was part of why I was so eager to speak to that group about storytelling and how leadership storytelling can improve your relationships internally, which then make your employees better ambassadors for your local government agency. So at the end of the conference, everybody's slapping your back and shaking your hand and saying, Hauson, that was amazing. I know I was one of them. The new Hauson fan club was in Montana. That was me. What did that inspire you to do immediately following the session and the conference itself? What's the next part of your story?
I guess it was one of the first times I had given a presentation in front of kind of the larger group of my personal team, of like Mike and like kind of the presidents of all the business lines. And so that created a sense of confidence in me to keep on doing the work. And so the direction that's evolved in is being more interactive with the audience. So rather than like one to everyone, instead of just me talking at people for an hour, we've started doing workshops. And so we just did our first workshop last week for the city of Olathe, and in trying to help them imagine the future of their workforce, more of like collaboratively. So like shifting my role towards one that like just creates a safe container and holds space for collaboration and creativity in a world where it's not really incentivized to hold space for. And I find it fascinating. It really is like magic. I want to find a more empowering metaphor for that. But it's because a lot of foresight processes are kind of like a U. And so you start at one point at the U at the very top, and you cannot see the other side of the U until you go all the way through it. And so that you cannot predict how it's going to go. You can't predict the impact it's going to have on the audience, but you still need to have the confidence to own the space, even when the potential for failure is like pretty high because there are a lot of things that you can't control. And so I think the impact of that presentation there was having the trust of my team and trust that the audience is ready for these kinds of conversations and that they want to have them.
That's awesome. That's perfect. It's such rewarding work when you see it in action. As you said, when you first kind of discovered foresight and the work of futurists, not knowing how to apply it, like I get it. This is really cool. I like the ideas behind it, but what's the action here? What do we do with this knowledge? And that's exactly what you're doing in your current job, is you're taking a practical application to this idea of predicting what the future could look like and putting plans in place to make sure we're prepared for that, or to put plans in place to shift that potential future so that our predictions aren't quite so dire in the next few years. I love the work you're doing, Hauson, and I'm so grateful that you found this at such a young age, and that as a community, we have a few decades more of your energy and knowledge to be able to help guide us.
There's a lot of people who talk about, like, at least in my age of like the 20s, like, oh, we're getting old, we need to start doing things. And it's just a very interesting narrative, because in my mind, I still got a lot of time to a lot of work to be done, but a lot of time, and it's going to be an exciting pathway. So, and I'm grateful to have met you and SGR, but you, because you were definitely, like, our interactions and the conversations we had were some of the most meaningful I've had. I think out of all the conferences I've been to at SGR. And so, yeah, you're definitely like a positive, like, guiding force in that direction. And it puts me at peace to know that you exist. People like you exist, and we can do this work together. So thank you.
We
Sarah.
can. And I hope we do. I could definitely see some collaboration in our future, for sure. Hauson, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today. And I know our listeners are going to want to know a little bit more about you. How do they reach you? How do they follow you? Where are you out in the world?
You can, I'm on LinkedIn. That is my go-to app to kind of find information on different fields. So you can look me up, Hauson, last name Le, on LinkedIn, if that works for you. Or you can email me, first name, last name @gmail.com, and be happy to talk or answer any questions, or even see what you're going through. I got you. I'm here to serve. So yeah, I like how change can be at individual level or like a ton. So it really doesn't matter as long as it's making a difference.
Well, I think it has to change at the individual level first. And then you can have a bigger impact. Yes. Hauson, thank you again. It was such a pleasure. And for our listeners, all of those links to Hauson's LinkedIn and his email address will be in the show notes associated with this podcast at elkinsconsulting.com. And thank you, listeners, for joining us today on the Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will podcast. And now it's your turn. What are your predictions for the future now? Are they positive? Is there something you need to change so that they become positive? And what are the 2 steps you can take tomorrow to change it so that your prediction shifts? Thanks again for listening.
Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.